It was late Thursday afternoon, which was as close to a normal Friday or Saturday evening as V and I could get with our conflicting schedules. I was still getting used to working the generic corpo routine I've been living for the last 3 months. It was nice to get home early each day, but I wasn't a morning person, and it was a bitch having to drag my ass out of bed to get to work. But as much as it had made my skin crawl having to fill out a resume and actually interview for a job, and I had actually interviewed for it, professional clothes and all, the work itself wasn't as bland or corrupt as I'd always feared it would be. I still did some smut on the side as a freelancer and tried to squeeze in a few hours for my personal edits when I could, but I'd quickly seen the appeal of having a steady paycheck. It wasn't sexy, but it was steady. And after having hit yet another birthday, I was fine with that. I was spending the last few minutes before the end of my shift the same way I always did, hunched over my desk, watching the seconds tick by on the clock. 4 edits per day was what I was contracted for, which gave me 2 hours for each of them. That was way too much time. Years of cranking out a dozen or more virtues in a single night had armed me with the skill to handle the light workload. But even though I spent more time than I would like tapping my fingers against my desk, my boss, Claire Moodles, still seemed impressed with my efforts. "What are you still doing here, Judy?" Claire asked as she stepped out of her office and threw her jacket over her shoulders. I shrugged. "Just closing out my shift, same as always. You headed home?" "Yep. Got a fun evening planned. Gonna make dinner, help my kids with their homework, and put them to bed before trying to catch up on some of my own work. I'm telling you, Judy, you don't know what you're missing out on." "Carajo," I chuckled at her sarcasm. "Not in a million fucking years." "Sorry. I'm sure you are," Claire remarked, rolling her eyes. She had nearly walked out the door, and I had begun shutting down my equipment when Claire spun on her heels. "By the way, speaking of luck, you know Liam is leaving the firm next week, right?" I nodded, even though I didn't have a clue who Liam was. But I wasn't lying, since I'd heard one of the other editors had landed a gig somewhere else and would be leaving soon. Guess now I knew. Still, I didn't have a clue what she was getting at, so I played along. Thought I heard something like that. Well, here's the deal. Losing Liam is gonna be a blow, and I wouldn't put it past him to try to poach some of our talent on his way out the door. Sounds like a problem. It is, Claire agreed. But in case you haven't noticed, the others have taken a real liking to you, Judy. You're sharp. You don't need to be micromanaged. You chip in and help with everyone else's problems. You're a natural leader. Now, I haven't decided anything yet, but I'm thinking this might be the right time to promote someone to a senior editor position, and with Liam gone, there's no one else who's even close to being as qualified for it as you are. I blinked, repeating Claire's words in my head to make sure I'd heard her correctly. As soon as she'd uttered the word promotion, my heart had fluttered in a way I hadn't experienced before. Working at Lizzie's had always been a job with no future. There was only one kind of work to be done, and while it paid well, pride had been the real currency I'd always craved. Eddies and a little bit of validation certainly never hurt, but knowing I had made something beautiful, something special, had always been the prize. Was I really that good? Or was this some scheme she'd cooked up? My mind continued to be caught in an endless tug of war, though I now understood how to get both sides to take a damn breather. Honesty and directness. Wait, are you giving me a promotion? No, Claire smirked. I'm not giving you anything, except a shot at one. You'll need to interview again, and I still remember how much you enjoyed that experience. So what do you think? I chewed on my lip. What did I think? Being recognized for my work and getting to teach others some of the skills I'd picked up over the years was a far more tantalizing prospect than I would have expected. There would be more eddies, and maybe even enough to swing for some of the dedicated therapy V and I had been eyeballing. And there was something indescribably sexy about having the word senior listed before my job title. But it wouldn't be easy money. I'd be stuck in this dress for more hours out of the week than I was now. Greater responsibilities would be thrust upon me, results would be expected, and much more importantly, people's livelihoods would be in my hands. If I failed, it wouldn't just be me that would suffer the consequences, and I had far too much recent experience in that arena to walk blindly into such a life-changing decision. I appreciate the thought, I offered. But, and I don't mean any offense, but I'm not sure if I'm cut out for that kind of job. Working round the clock, having to deal with people all the time. You wouldn't be working around the clock, Claire quickly clarified, perhaps showing more of her hand than she'd intended. We'd backfill your role, and you'd have a small team to look after. Hell, I'll even make sure it's stacked with the best editors, so I don't have to worry about Liam trying to swoop in and take him away. I don't know, I said with a sly grin. Sounds to me like I got more than just a shot at it. Claire breathed a sigh of defeat. Possibly. Look, think it over, and let me know tomorrow, okay? If you're gonna make me wait any longer than that, I'm gonna put you through 2 rounds of interviews. And on that note, I'm gonna head home. I'll let you know. Thanks, Claire. Don't thank me yet, Claire called out as she made her way to the exit. Good night. Good night. As soon as I was by myself, I allowed my jaw to drop to the floor. A promotion? It seemed too good to be true, considering how hard it had been to even get a foot in the door a few months ago. But my work spoke for itself, and I'd busted my ass knowing I had more talent than anyone else I was working with. Maybe I had truly earned it. Or maybe not. I sighed and rubbed my temples. It seemed that this kind of indecision played itself out more often with each passing day. Questioning every good thing that happened, second-guessing every decision I made. It was still miles better than twisting everything to suit some nefarious purpose I'd engineered, but it was still tiring. But I didn't need to decide anything now. I checked my holo and was relieved to see it was time to go home. After shutting my equipment off, I made my way through the narrow rows of cubicles and turned at the end of the hall, waving to the receptionist on the way out the door. If there was one perk I treasured more than any other, it was the parking privileges. My days of slogging several city blocks to get to and from my van were over. Now, it only took me a few seconds to reach my parking space. If I really wanted to be a hard ass, I could try to negotiate a spot that was a little closer to the door, but it wasn't like a few extra steps were going to kill me. The traffic situation, however, was a different matter, as things in Seattle were somehow worse than Night City. Perhaps it was because the city wasn't as populated, and therefore the infrastructure and public transportation hadn't been maintained. Or maybe no one wanted to cough up the eddies to widen the road. Either way, the commute back to our apartment usually wound up eating an hour of my life away. I had to be quite the sight for anyone stuck at the red light with me. A cross between a tattoo-covered punk with blue hair and a finely dressed corpo, bopping along to the loud beat of music blasting out of her rickety van. A hot mess, to be sure, but a beautiful one. With only a few more miles to go before I got home, I was pulled out of my trance when I received a call. Recognizing the number, I turned the volume down and answered. Hey, Katie. Hey, Judy. How's things? They're going all right. I'm just on my way back home after my shift. What's up? Oh, shit. The bright smile on Katie's face quickly faltered. Hope I'm not bothering you. I can call back later if I am. You're not bothering me, I assured her. Just tell me what's going on. Well, I'm trying to install the new motherboard like you told me to, but I can't seem to get the new soft booted up. Is it not turning on at all, or are you getting an error message? Yeah, hang on. It says, error BD 102581. Failure to load. The log data is corrupt. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? I've been stuck on this for the last hour. Katie was lucky I wasn't charging her for the hours of tech support I'd provided the last few months. Truthfully, though, I didn't mind it that much. She had come a long way in mastering some of the basics and had even managed to compile her first BD, though I'd been very careful in delivering my feedback sandwich to her. Tremendous praise. A succinct bullet list of everything she had done wrong, phrased nicely, of course, followed by more heaps of praise. I didn't know if she would ever blossom into a natural talent, but helping her was no hardship. Did you purge the memory first? Was I supposed to? Yes, Katie. I told you that a few days ago. Give it a try, I suggested. I didn't swipe most of that stuff when I gave it to you, so it probably needs to be cleaned out before you can load any new peripherals. Purging the motherboard should take about an hour or so. If it's still not booting up after that, then give me another call and I'll see if I can squeeze in a remote diagnostic sometime tomorrow. Confident with the steps I'd laid out before her, Katie was beaming once more. Judy, you're the best. Thanks so much. Don't mention it. A wave of relief washed over me as I finally caught sight of Union Street up ahead. Listen, I'm almost home and gotta run. Let me know how it goes and we'll talk later, okay? You betcha. I hung up and turned the van onto a small cul-de-sac. Tall apartment buildings lined the streets, but my eyes were focused on the one at the farthest end. Like the mega buildings in Night City, they all appeared to be clones of one another, though at least there wasn't any peeling paint or graffiti to be found on its brick surfaces, and my knees were still thanking me for the working elevator that hauled my bones up and down from the top floor. A small smile crossed my lips when I spotted V's car parked next to mine. It was a rare sight considering the late hours she often put in, and while the Archer Hella's boxy frame was a far cry from her sleeker style, she had at least managed to find one in cherry red. It still took some getting used to the relative silence as I climbed out of my van and approached the entrance, stopping at the door to wave my wrist in front of the biometric panel. The police sirens were still a regular occurrence, though they weren't as frequent as they'd been in Night City. Having our unit situated at the far end of the street also meant that the sounds of traffic didn't reach our building. It wasn't bad. It was simply different. Ironically, the elevator was what reminded me of our former home more than anything else. The lift was functional, though its rickety frame shook and groaned as it slowly ascended toward the top. Thick layers of colorful graffiti coated the walls and the unmistakable stench of pot permeated the air. But the few neighbors we'd met kept to themselves, so it wasn't like we were shacking up with a bunch of claws. We didn't have the perk of living in an end unit anymore, though. Instead, our apartment was sandwiched in the middle of the hall. We did face the west side, however, which afforded us a decent view of the ocean whenever the couple across the hall descended into one of their shouting matches. Finally, I reached the top and walked to the front door. Another brief wave of my wrist over the panel next to it was all it took for me to be greeted with the sight of our home. Our home. It really did feel like we had more space, even though a lot of that had to do with all the crap we'd left behind. The bathroom was definitely smaller. We were constantly knocking our things off of the sink and had to pile our clothes in a basket near the door since we shared a common laundry at the end of the hall. But we always had hot water, and our bedroom was like something out of a corpo hotel. Plush carpeting, a small window so we didn't have to fumble around in the dark, and a bigger bed so I wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night with V snoring in my ear. The layout allowed me to see through the kitchen and into the living area. We were still collecting whatever pieces of furniture we could get our hands on, but it was coming along pretty well. A small desk tucked away in a corner for my BD setup, a tattered sectional couch that had been left behind by the previous owners, and a few shelves had found their way onto the walls. We were even the proud owners of a set of chairs and a small wooden dining table, which was exactly where my eyes were drawn toward. It wasn't bare like I was accustomed to seeing. Instead, it looked like something right out of Blue. Almost. "Hey," V called out. "Hey, what's all this?" "This," V spread her arms, presenting the elaborate display she'd meticulously planned, "is your table for the evening. I'm V, and I'll be your waitress this evening." I laughed and stepped closer to take in the scene. V must have put quite a bit of effort into this. Laying out the tableware, lighting candles, even donning a black long sleeve and a matching pair of pants to try to dress the part. She seemed to be loving her brief change in occupation, judging from the wide grin on her face. For tonight's entrees, we have a large, soggy pizza with extra cheese and locust pepperoni, as well as a pair of burrito rosados, freshly nuked. My eyes had been following along with V's description, and by the time they settled upon the burritos, my stomach was growling. And, V continued, the sommelier has recommended an excellent pairing of Nicola to go with your meal this evening. My heart melted. Sure enough, on one side of the table, soda bubbles were rising to the surface of a wine glass. Across from it, a porcelain mug in the shape of a cat had been filled to the brim. If only it wasn't soda. Every second I steered clear of the bottle was a victory to be celebrated, and V was proud of me for it. But the saying, every day is a struggle, didn't even begin to encapsulate the way I'd often fiend for that familiar burn down my throat, or the way it would wash over my brain, drowning it in a cool haze. What made matters even worse was the way I kept trying to justify failure to myself. Almost everyone relapses at some point, so it's not that big of a deal. Oh, and there's nothing wrong with having an occasional beer, or even a cocktail every so often. Grow up a little and take some accountability. Throw one back and enjoy yourself. But I had worked damn hard to keep myself sober. The apartment remained dry. No after-work trips to the bars with my coworkers, and V was there, offering as much support as she could to dispel my cravings. You fucking outdid yourself this time, I exclaimed. But you still know that no matter how much you try to sweet-talk me, I'm not washing nibbles out in the morning, right? V smiled, her eyes briefly darting toward her new mug. I'll be sure to hose the guy down later. He's due for a bath anyway. V nodded toward the bedroom. Go on and get changed. Unless maybe you want to try role-playing as the fancy corpo exec, and I can be the slutty street kid you hired who keeps messing up her work and needs to be reprimanded. I raised an eyebrow at the interesting turn of conversation. It's a pretty tempting idea. But you screwed up by having hot food on the table first. Besides, you might not want to roleplay that exact scenario after I tell you about what happened at work. What happened? Later. I winked and strolled toward our bedroom, leaving V to wonder about the mystery I'd just left her with. After kicking off my shoes, I'd made my way inside and began to peruse the dresser we shared. What to wear? Ordinarily, I'd pick out a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants or shorts in anticipation of the lazy evening that lay ahead of me, but that seemed a bit too casual. Sure, V wouldn't care, but I didn't want her feeling like she'd dressed herself up for nothing. Pursing my lips, I finally decided not to change out of what I was already wearing. If she wanted me to be a fancy corpo exec, I was game. My mouth was watering when I returned to the kitchen. Shit, I'm starving, I announced. V had already taken a seat at the table. She looked up, surprised to see me still in my dress. Didn't feel like getting comfortable? I am, I said as I sat across from her and crossed my legs seductively. V tried to play it cool, but I spotted a hint of pink rising to her cheeks. Sit down and dig in then. I hope you don't mind if I went ahead and picked off the pepperoni on your half. I told them not to cover the whole damn thing, but they obviously didn't listen. As hungry as I was, I paused to take it all in. It was almost too perfect. Thanks, V. For doing all this, I mean. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while now, and I guess I just got too wrapped up with things. No, you didn't, V countered. We've both been busting our asses for the last 12 weeks. I'll fess up and say I hadn't thought about it either, until a couple came in a few nights ago to celebrate their anniversary. My eyes snapped open. Wait, it's not... No, it's not, V laughed as she took a bite from her pizza. We still got another couple of months to go before we hit ours, but it did get me thinking of what I could plan on short notice, and since I'm off tonight, I figured I might go with what I could scrape together. It's not much, but you did damn good. This Nicola is incredible, I joked, taking a sip from my soda. How's it going at the bar anyway? You're not hating it, are you? Nah. V waved her hand nonchalantly. I mean, sure. The usual drunkards are there every night before closing, eye fucking my ass like there's no tomorrow. But the bouncers got my back, and I'm pulling in some pretty decent tips. It's not gig money, but still. Oh, and the owner's cool too. Let me break that one guy's jaw a few weeks back when he tried to get a little too friendly with me. Didn't even get a slap on the wrist for it. I nodded, taking another bite from my quickly disappearing burrito. We had both known when we left Night City that we weren't leaving any of our problems behind. While I was relieved to have V out of the line of fire, I knew her entire life's ambition wasn't to be a bartender. I didn't think she was lying whenever she tried to sell me on how much she liked it over being a mercenary, but there was a reason she'd gone into that line of work in the first place, a reason why she'd decided not to serve drinks. But this was something V needed to work out for herself. I'd supported her since we'd first set foot in Seattle, and I would continue to do so. Besides, she had a line on something that might offer her the best of both worlds. How much longer do you think it'll be before the firm takes you on full time? No clue, V shrugged. I guess they're fully staffed at the moment, so unless they get a few new clients who need private security, they'll keep me on call in case they need an extra hand. But is that still what you want? Judy, you gotta stop asking me that all the time. V set a half-eaten piece of pizza on her plate and washed it down with a gulp of soda before continuing. It's like you keep trying to forget what I was doing for a living a few months ago. All the shit I've seen. No, this is better. Private security. I won't be running and gunning and doing all kinds of shady shit for a payday. Now, I could end up protecting some shady people, sure, but... Alright, I grumbled. But speak up if you change your mind or think about doing something different. Don't want you feeling like you gotta lock yourself in with this for the rest of your life or do this for me. Speak up, huh? V raised an eyebrow. Interesting perspective coming from you. I mean that lovingly, of course. I'm sure you do. The irony wasn't lost on me, but we were both becoming more attuned to one another and how we truly felt beneath the surface. Neither of us wanted things to fester until they manifested themselves in destructive ways like they used to. Being as healthy as we were able to be was what we were all about, except when food was concerned, which meant having to sometimes lean into hard conversations. But for the next few minutes, we were content to simply shut the fuck up and gorge ourselves. If we had been at Blue, I could only imagine the expressions of all the fancy well-to-dos as we smacked our lips and licked our fingers clean. So, what's this you were telling me about your work? V asked. Should I be worried? Well, that depends. How would you like to see even less of me? Quality, not quantity. I couldn't believe she remembered those words. It had been a catchphrase of mine I'd adopted long ago. But when was the last time I'd said it? Months ago? Touché, I smiled. Claire dropped a bomb on me just before she left. Said she's thinking of promoting me. Holy shit! That's fucking Nova! Once again, I felt that odd flutter in my heart. I really was desperate for some adulation, wasn't I? Yeah, I guess it kinda is, isn't it? Sure it is. Did she tell you how much more you'd make? Dare I even say benefits? I shook my head in disbelief. You got a one-track mind, don't you? I didn't mean it like that. I know. I'm just busting your balls a little, I chuckled while nibbling away at my last piece of crust. We didn't talk about pay or anything like that. It ain't like at Lizzie's where Susie and I could just renegotiate something on the fly. The studio's got laws to follow and policies to abide by. But sounds like I'd be a lock for it. V smiled and leaned back in her seat, an almost evil glimmer forming in her eyes. Well, look at you, turning all corpo on me. Fuck off. I threw the crust at V, who easily swatted it away. I'd definitely make more, but I'd have to spend more time in the office. Same thing you told me, she said. Go for it only if you want to. If you don't feel like a stuffy office is the right place for you, then we'll figure something else out. Just the sound of that word, office, should have sent a chill up my spine like it used to. It was impossible to do anything creative in a tiny cubicle with a bunch of suits watching over you. At least, that was what I told myself every time I deleted one of those offers I used to get. But I wasn't being scrutinized by Claire, and I felt like I was finding more opportunities to inject myself into the work I did. Sure, a lot of the BDs tended to be historical reenactments, and who knew if the writers and actors were getting any of the details right. There were so many opportunities, though, to find new moments to highlight. It was no longer about blurring out scuzzy-looking backdrops that had been hastily erected for a scene. Instead, I was now actively trying to bring out the textures of the setting, and instead of amplifying moans and mewls, I was listening intently for subtle inflections in a voice to accent the emotional impact. I never would have thought it possible, but it really wasn't work. It was art. I think I want to go for it, I finally said. Feels good knowing that others are seeing what I can do, besides tune up a preem orgasm. I don't know. Kinda almost feel like I'm finally becoming the artist I always wanted to be. You always were. Something in V's tone caused my eyes to sting. A part of me wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. She was being honest. Stop or you're gonna make me cry. And besides, the extra eddies would be really great to have for some of those therapy services we were checking out. V frowned. Are you not getting much out of your Sunday appointments? I wanted to tell V that I was crying my eyes out every week as I dove deep into my mess of issues and untangled them one loose end at a time. That was what I was supposed to say, but the words wouldn't escape my lips, and for good reason. It wasn't the truth. I guess I'm getting out of them what little I can, but for 20 minutes once a week, I'm barely able to scratch the surface or talk about any of the nightmares before the docs reminded me that time's up. Yeah, I get that. But it's better than nothing, I quickly added when I saw the disappointment on her face. And I still got you to talk to. Hell, if nothing else, at least Rita and I can call each other and brag about what insights we've learned each week. V allowed herself a small smile and finished the rest of her soda. She's still keeping up with it then? I shrugged. The last time I'd talked to her had been a couple of weeks earlier, and she'd been rather vague then. I'm actually not sure. I told you she fell off the wagon again last month, right? V nodded. She woke up face down in an alleyway with more scrap in her system than I had when I OD'd. I had no memory of what happened either. She kept saying she wasn't interested in knowing, and that she would try going sober again. God damn it. V shook her head. Is she still longing for a new flavor of the cotton candy couple? I laughed, and for a moment, considered telling V a little white lie, but decided against it. She trusted me and never pried into what Rita and I talked about, but I knew Rita's feelings toward me had to occasionally grate on her. She's brought it up once or twice, but she doesn't go there anymore. I told her we're staying blue and pink, and that's that. Something flashed behind V's eyes. I started to wonder whether she believed me or not. I was being honest. She didn't have any reason to doubt me. Well, the next time you talk to her, let her know I said hi, and I'm wishing her the best of luck. I smiled, grateful and ashamed for the small wave of relief I felt. That brief moment of doubt was an artifact of what I would be trying to fix for most, if not all, of my life. Will do, I said. Sounds like she's gonna need it. V pushed herself away from the table and walked into the kitchen to grab another can of Nicola. Was she planning to keep me up all night? If so, there were easier ways of doing that than flooding my system with caffeine. You ask her about the mocks and what's going on with all that? She asked as she made her way back to me. I shook my head. Fuck. With a sigh, V opened the can and poured some into my glass. She was about to sit down when she stopped herself. I'm fucking stuffed. I'm never gonna move again if I sit down. Yeah, I'm full too. I'm also getting kinda tired. I yawned and noticed a flicker of disappointment behind V's eyes. Ordinarily, I could have laid down and quickly passed out, but I didn't want to waste the rest of our night together. I stretched my jaw and straightened up in my chair. "So," I ventured, "got anything else planned for our date tonight? 'Cause if not, I'm perfectly fine taking you to bed right now." V never ceased to amaze me. Her ability to turn some hidden switch and go from one emotional state to another was something I admired. As soon as I'd asked what else she might have planned, the disappointment had faded from her eyes. She smiled and raised a finger. "Hold that thought." Curious to see what was in store for us, I watched as V ventured into the living room and began rustling through the BD newsletters on my desk before turning around with a pair of cartridges in her hand. I didn't want to decide what to watch by myself, so I picked out a couple different ones. We got Bushido 6, which apparently is where the series finally clawed its way out of the gutter, or this classic gem right here. I couldn't help but notice the way V bit her lip as she held up the unfamiliar cartridge for me to examine. Stand By Me? My brow narrowed. What's that about? To find that out, you'll have to take a little leap of faith and watch it with me. Another cold dose of reality suddenly hit me. We had traveled along this path for as long as we could, and we were both ready to call it quits. And all I could think about was how much of a blessing it was. "We're giving up on the Bushido series, aren't we?" I asked. "Seems that way," V agreed, tossing the cartridge aside. "I kinda checked out after 4 anyway. You?" 3. "To the couch then?" "Not yet. What the hell are you thinking, Jude? Can't have a movie night without." She ran into the kitchen and produced a bag of kernels. "Popcorn!" Fuck, I loved that woman so much. That's my girl. Once the apartment was filled with the savory scent of butter, we nestled together on the couch. It wasn't quite as large as the one we'd had before, but it had a small chase that allowed one of us to lay crisscrossed. Even though V had felt gracious and offered to use her lap as a pillow, I turned her down and insisted that I be her cushion instead. The movie, like so many others V had somehow discovered, was strange. The period it was set in was more than a century removed from the present, and it had only taken a few minutes to realize I would be watching nothing but boys running around for the next couple of hours. But unlike the others, I was hooked by the very first words that were spoken.
I was living in a small town in Oregon called Castle Rock. There were only 1,281 people, but to me it was the whole world. Hey, it's the boss man, Bob.
Hello? How could I not relate to that? Castle Rock might as well have been named Laguna Bend. And like the narrator had said, that little town had been my entire world. As the movie progressed, I would occasionally overhear V whisper a line of dialogue to herself. She seemed to know the entire movie by heart, and I had to admit, it was captivating. I found myself standing in the shoes of a 12-year-old boy, struggling to believe his own self-worth. Granted, there was plenty of period comedy scattered throughout, and I did laugh at a couple parts, particularly the bit where they found themselves covered in leeches. But the mood quickly turned sober in the scene that followed. It was night, and the young boy was sitting next to his best friend near a campfire. The conversation was serious as the boy revealed why he didn't think he was any good.
Don't say that, man. No good. My dad said it, I'm no good. He doesn't know you.
Even though I had never known my father, those words were frighteningly similar to the ones that had reverberated inside of my skull for decades. How many times had the monster tried to convince me of that awful lie? I'd gotten so used to it after a while that it simply faded into the background, like a song stuck endlessly on repeat. I choked back a sob. V squeezed my leg, but didn't lift her head. We continued to watch as the journey the boys had embarked upon reached its conclusion. Near the end, the two boys who were best friends parted ways, and the same narrator who, from the beginning of the film, spoke once more.
Chris did get out. He enrolled in the college courses with me, and although it was hard, he gutted it out like he always did. He went on to college and eventually became a lawyer.
By the time the credits rolled, I felt very much like the characters in the film, as if my entire life's journey had somehow been encapsulated in just a couple of hours. I couldn't stop thinking how much those words mirrored my own life, minus the part about college and becoming a lawyer. I'd sooner jump off the Space Needle than be subjected to the horrors of the legal profession. V took a deep breath and wiped her face dry before shifting to look up at me. What did you think? Another line from the movie suddenly popped into my head. I couldn't recall it exactly, but it had something to do with a scene where the characters understood the deeper meaning of what they were doing, but none of them chose to speak of it. Not because they were afraid to, but because it was simply a part of their inner self. Something that needed to stay inside because to let it out would shatter the beauty of it all. I told V the truth, but I was mindful of the deeper meaning behind my words, choosing to keep them to myself. It was a hell of a journey. A loud yawn suddenly escaped my lips. I picked up my hollow and glanced at the time. Feeling pretty beat, and I still gotta go to work tomorrow, I groaned. Making me stay up all late and such. You know I gotta be back in the office in 6 hours, right? Instead of answering me, V reached up and grazed the back of a finger along my cheek. I leaned into the touch, closing my eyes as her digit chased along my jaw and briefly flirted with my lower lip. What do you say to making that 5.5 hours? Wow, that's such a damned good pickup line, V. Making me wet just thinking about it. Can I see for myself? V asked, chewing on her lip. You know I'm gonna do the same thing to you when you get home from work tomorrow. Can't wait to see how sleep-deprived you are when we go visit my abuela. V's eyes narrowed. You promise to keep me up all night? Christ, she was incessant, and her wit only grew the hornier she became. Not that I minded. Her nipples poked against the fabric of her shirt like a pair of tempting targets. Carajo, what am I gonna do with you? So many possibilities come into mind. To emphasize my point, I allowed my hand to leave her shoulder and to drift along the length of her body. What are you gonna do with me? V repeated my question back to me. Judy, that's too easy. As are you, I said with a sly grin. Come with me. I let V climb off of me and led the way toward the bedroom. We'd certainly fucked on the couch before, but the apartment complexes on either side of ours would have ringside seats to our escapade. While I wasn't against a bit of friendly exhibitionism, it was a different matter knowing I'd likely pass by our audience on my way to and from work each day. I didn't want to be that neighbor. Besides, with the larger bed, we had much more room to work with. The faint glow of ambient city light filtered through the window. V pulled the shade down, unwittingly offering me a perfect opportunity. I closed the distance and came up behind her, pinning her against the wall and sliding my hand around her waist. I brought my lips to her ear. Did I say to pull those blinds down? V pushed her ass back against me and spoke in a raspy voice. I'm sorry, Miss Álvarez. Something about hearing V refer to me like that made my cunt clench. I gripped the waistband of her pants and tugged them down to her ankles in one firm motion, smiling to myself when I saw she wasn't wearing any panties. Her scent quickly reached my nostrils, and all it took was the delicate graze of a finger along her folds to feel how wet she was. Jesus, V, you're soaked. You really would get off if you were working for me, wouldn't you? Working under me, being my little subordinate. V was becoming more needy with every word I spoke, even letting out a small whimper toward the end. Useful. Fuck, she breathed against the glass. I'd do anything you'd told me to. Work extra hours, wear what you wanted me to wear. Even park myself under your desk when no one else was looking. It's not too late, Judy. You can still clamp up and give her the fantasy she wants. Fuck her senseless and leave her wanting for more. Think about what she would do. I cut off my inner dialogue and turned V around so she could face me. Even in the dim light, it was startling to see how blown out her pupils had become. I'm having some dirty thoughts about that, I admitted, using our code slang we'd settled upon for when my brain started acting up. Of course, like I told you before, in a corpo office, there are rules I gotta follow too. Taking a step back, I slid the straps of my dress over my shoulders and shimmied out of it, stepping over the thin fabric and revealing myself fully to her. You mean I could get you in trouble? V asked innocently. Definitely, I admitted, as V pulled her top off. I was glad she was playing along with me. Could be compromised and find myself having to do whatever it is you want. Giving you preem assignments, bringing you coffee in the morning, inspiring you on your breaks. Don't flip things around. Don't give her control or you'll... V pulled me toward her and kissed me. This wasn't one of those gentle kisses either. She was crushing my lips with her own, almost commanding me with her mouth. When I started to feel weak at the knees, I pulled away with a gasp. And that's why we're gonna trust one another with this little secret, I whispered. A mutually beneficial relationship, as we call it in the biz. Just between you and me. No one else can know, or we'll both be in trouble. I pulled V away from the wall and we crashed on top of the bed. She was quick to get on top of me and straddle my hips, allowing me the chance to cup her tits and rub my thumbs over her nipples. Her back arched into my mouth, and she lifted her head to release a vulgar moan before spilling back down and wrapping her mouth over one of my breasts. My breath hitched in my throat when I felt her hands slide between my legs. I could actually hear her fingers sliding over my folds. I was that wet. Just as I was about to grab a handful of her hair and pull her face back to my own, V tore her tongue away from my nipples and began to slowly drag her tongue across my abdomen, drifting lower. Let me eat you out, Judy. I want to go down on you for hours, and I grabbed V by the shoulders, stopping her. As tempting as it sounded to let her go to town on me, that damned voice in my head had been screaming about control, and I wanted to keep us on an even keel. For as long as we could, at least. You haven't been listening, have you? I reminded V with a slap on the ass. I said mutually beneficial. Just so we're both safe. V didn't need any more prompting. Both of us were panting as we shifted on the bed, V swinging herself around and resting her knees next to the side of my head as I spread my legs for her. I could plainly see her glistening folds, and I licked my lips in anticipation. My favorite meal. There wasn't any foreplay or teasing. My eyes rolled back in my head as V plunged between my legs, using that talented tongue of hers in all the ways she knew would undo me. Not to be outdone, I grabbed her ass and pulled her hips down onto my face, but no matter how much I lapped away at her pussy, I kept getting interrupted by the tongue between my own legs. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer. Shit, V, have I ever told you how good you are with your tongue? I whimpered when V pulled her mouth away. Might have mentioned it before, she said in a husky voice. Give me a check and tell me how you're doing. As much as I wanted to fold my knees over her head and push her face right back down, I forced myself to pause. The safety checks did annoy the hell out of me, but they had turned out to be a brilliant idea. While V was incredibly understanding about my need to vent out my thoughts during sex, we both knew there was a need for the right filters. We'd settled on the code words dirty thoughts to describe my inner language, and although it had taken some time, I'd become adept at voicing things in a healthier manner that didn't spoil the mood. But it was still impossible to figure out when those thoughts would happen. At first, it seemed simple. The hornier and closer to orgasm I got, the more my brain acted up and railed against the dynamics at play. But lately, it had been happening more at the beginning of sex, before going oddly quiet. I didn't know if I was improving or if my mind was simply adapting and trying to find an outlet. Either way, those safety checks were a way for both of us to build comfort with each other, Hearing nothing but a singular voice inside of my head begging for V to keep going, I nodded. Got no problem telling you how much I love when you suck on my clit. I couldn't see her face, but I knew V was grinning as she wrapped her mouth over the sensitive bud and began to suck, causing me to buck my hips. If she kept at it like this, I wasn't going to last long. Jesus, just like that. Fuck, V, how'd you manage to move it like that? How do you do that to me? It quickly became impossible to focus on her. Hell, I couldn't even talk straight anymore, as V threw everything she had into her tongue, driving me wild. A pair of fingers slid inside of me and were quickly joined by a third. V didn't seem to mind that I had stopped licking her and was letting her fuck me like there was no tomorrow. An incredible tingling pressure was building in my abdomen, and she must have sensed it as she quickened her motions and flicked her tongue across my clit. Realizing what was about to happen, I tried to warn her, but all that came out of my mouth was a scream that echoed off the walls. I dug my nails into the flesh of her ass as a mind-numbing orgasm exploded between my legs. Fuck. It didn't seem to end as I kept coming, wave after wave of pleasure rippling through me. Finally, I went limp, my muscles spasming as I heaved for breath. V soon turned around to face me. God damn, Judy, look what you did to me. I managed to part my eyes open and saw that V's face was absolutely drenched. A few strands of tangled hair stuck to her cheeks, and a thin line of my cum hung from her chin. She was a mess, and judging from the pride in her eyes, she'd enjoyed every second of it almost as much as I had. Shit, I breathed. Well, I said mutually beneficial, didn't I? Still trying to catch my breath, I forced myself onto my knees and pushed V onto her back. Guess it's time for me to uphold my end of the arrangement. I rolled over and positioned myself between V's legs, bringing my face just inches away from her slick pussy, which was radiating heat. You ready? I asked. We both understood the layered meaning behind the question. I'd expressed to V months earlier that I often felt exposed, at a disadvantage even, when I had to voice my thoughts out loud. V had settled upon a simple, yet surprisingly effective solution. She would tell me exactly what it was she wanted me to do to her. It sounded so easy to do, but it had turned out to be anything but. This whole concept of openness was something we needed to keep exploring. The revelation that V liked having her mouth covered during sex had seemed innocuous, even tame at the time. But once she had mentioned the obvious reasons behind her discomfort, I had understood. Now that we had torn down the barriers between us, I was beginning to see there was an entire ocean of unexplored kinks she wanted to explore. Role-playing, submissiveness, anal, dirty talk. V was expressing interest in all of them to one degree or another, but was still holding back. It was yet another mark that had been left upon her, and while it would take time to scrape away those lingering bits of shame, I was determined to do it. Not for myself, though I was equally excited to explore more of our sexuality together, but for V. She deserved to have the same confidence to express herself that she'd given to me. Fortunately, it seemed like we were making good headway as V smiled and rested a hand on top of my head. Fuck me. I smiled and kept my eyes fixed on hers as I slowly ran my tongue along her folds, taking delight in the way she hissed as I stopped to focus on her clit. Feels good? I asked. That feels so fucking good, Judy, V said through lidded eyes. You got no idea. Think I might, but tell me, and be specific. What do you want? There was a flicker of indecision behind her eyes before she tightened her jaw and forced the words out. I want you to slow down a little and play with my nipples. I did exactly as V wanted, slowly lapping away at her while I reached up and began teasing her sensitive points. V bucked beneath me and moaned. Fuck. Just like that. Deciding to take a little risk, I gently pinched her nipples between my fingers. V's breath caught in her throat and her mouth hung open. She wasn't even bothering to watch me anymore. Not that she needed to. If closing her eyes helped to bring more of her inner desires out, hell, a blindfold might be something to look into. Do you like that? Yes. Soft like this? I asked, giving them another gentle pinch. Or harder. I had to exercise every ounce of self-control I had to keep myself from projecting my own wanton needs onto her and pinching them the way I'd like to. I'd done that so many times before, but had never bothered to understand if she liked it that way or if she was only responding how she thought I wanted her to. It had taken years to build the kind of trust we enjoyed now, and it could all be lost with one wrong move. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Soft, V whispered, licking her lips, just like you're doing now. Oh my God, Judy. In me, please. I was amazed how easily my index and middle fingers slipped inside of V. When V continued her anxious whimpering, I inserted a third. Her walls were pressing around them, but it was still so easy to fuck her. An idea suddenly sprang to mind. Carefully, I added my pinky finger and pushed all 4 fingers inside of her. It was tight, and I moved slowly to make sure I wasn't stretching her too much. But V was thrusting into my movements, and another gentle pinch of her nipple with my free hand gave me the encouragement I needed to keep going. Sensing the time had come to see how open V was truly willing to be with me, I twisted my wrist slightly and pushed further inside of her until my thumb brushed against her asshole. V gasped, her eyes popping open. Do you want me to do this tonight or not? It took a moment for her to respond. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Are you sure? Tell me if you do or don't. I do. Just a finger? I asked, applying a subtle hint of pressure, but not enough to enter her. Or maybe my tongue. I gently flicked my tongue against her clit to demonstrate. Her mouth, tits, pussy, ass, I didn't care. If V wanted something, I was more than willing to give it to her. I only needed her to tell me. Even though her pussy was throbbing, her cheeks somehow managed to steal enough blood away to blush. Are you sure? Only if you are, but I think you want this. I was slowly circling my thumb around the edges of her ring, studying her every reaction. Think you want me to do this to you? All you gotta do is tell me, V. Just don't kiss me on the mouth after. I could sense her discomfort dissolving away as the sensitive muscle beneath my thumb began to relax. I don't... Tell me. I want your tongue. Jesus. It was almost absurd that the thought of eating another woman's ass, only because she had worked up the nerve to do so, nearly moved me to tears. But it did. She didn't need to say or do anything else. I was so proud of her. I pulled my fingers out of her and shuffled onto my knees. Pull your legs back to your chest. V did as I asked, gulping as she fully exposed herself to me. Once I was comfortable, I took a moment to admire the view. I'd seen her like this before, but now I was finally going to get the chance to show V just how much I admired her ass. I lowered my face and gently flicked the tip of my tongue against her asshole, causing her thighs to quiver. Resisting the impulse to bury myself as deeply inside of her as I could, I repeated the motion over and over again until she seemed relaxed. With the time for teasing at an end, I pinched her sensitive nipple between my fingers and used my other hand to begin circling her clit. Finally, I tensed my tongue and eased the tip inside of her. Judy, oh, fuck. I moved slowly, the taste of her pussy still fresh on my tongue and masking any unpleasantness. When I couldn't go any further, I swirled around inside of her before slowly pulling out and thrusting back in. Setting a slow and steady rhythm, I worked V over every way I knew how to. Fuck, V shouted, her entire body shaking. I'm not gonna last long. I looked up and was pleased to see V staring back at me. Hopefully, I would give her something to remember. You want me to do it? I asked before sliding my tongue back inside of her. Yes. Tell me. Wanna be sure. Fucking do it. Confident in what she wanted, I pulled my hand away from V's breast and pressed my palm over her mouth. There was an immediate spasm between her legs as hot breath rushed against my hand from her muffled screams. Her face had turned a bright shade of red, and her eyes nearly bulged from their sockets as she bucked against my face and began to tighten. Come for me. V screamed into my palm as I worked her furiously with my tongue and fingers, causing her to squirt across my face. Another scream followed, and even though it was smothered under my palm, I was certain it was still loud enough to wake up the neighbors. With a final grunt, she collapsed into a sweaty mess. Holy fuck, V panted between breaths. Oh, fuck. I smiled and straightened up so V could see what she'd done. Guess you decided to get back at me. V's brow momentarily narrowed in confusion before her eyes widened. Oh shit. I chuckled and wiped some of the squirt away from my eyes. Mutually beneficial, V. Just like I said. Give me a sec. V could only nod as I stood and staggered toward the bathroom. The muscles in my legs still trembled from how hard I had come a few minutes earlier. After cleaning up and washing my mouth out, brushing my teeth for good measure, I rejoined V, who had yet to move. I pulled the soiled sheet out from under her and grabbed the blanket. What happened, V? Did I break you? Might have, V snorted. Don't know if I've ever come that hard. Yo también. Scooch over a bit. V managed to drag her ass over to her usual spot in bed, allowing me to lay down and drape the blanket over us. Once we were both comfortable, we laid on our sides, face to face. I brushed away a few strands of hair still clinging to her forehead. Want to talk about it? She asked. I nodded. Started having some dark thoughts right out of the gate again, but I think I got them out of me the right way. Nothing came across weird, did it? Not at all. Loved the mutually beneficial bit. Pretty fucking clever, actually. I'm glad you approved. V smiled and took my hand into her own before closing her eyes. I could fall asleep like this every night. Her tone carried a hint of sadness in it, and once again I was reminded of the movie we'd watched earlier. We both knew what the other was thinking. Or, rather, what we both feared. How long would this last? Life was full of ups and downs, and we'd both been on one hell of a roller coaster ride. We had never reached such a high point before, and we both knew there would be hard days ahead. But we were together, sitting in the same cart just like we had at Pacifica, and neither of us would ever let go of each other. I was more sure of it than anything else I'd ever been sure of in my entire life. We will, I assured her. We'll always be this close, even when we're apart. V drew a deep, comforting breath and slowly released it. I love you. More than I can ever tell you. And I love you, mi calabacita. Go to sleep. I'll be here when you wake up. Think I'm falling asleep, drifting off. I looked down at our hands, which remained linked together, and gasped as tears formed in my eyes. My most recent tattoo had been inspired by the story V had told me about why she had gotten hers. While I continued to discover new meaning in the plethora of phrases and images that covered my skin, this one held more meaning for me than any other ever would. And the fact that V had joined me and gotten a matching one only deepened the significance. Encircling my wrist was a life ring with a thin rope that extended up the length of my arm before curving toward my elbow. V's was identical, except for one subtle difference. Mine was missing a single band of shading on the ring. In its place was the scar on my wrist. We could never have planned for this moment, even though the tattoos had been sketched with this very purpose in mind. The way our arms were arranged, the ropes running along our arms appeared to join one another at their ends, inexorably linking us together. I closed my eyes and bit my lip as my mind wandered toward the next tattoo idea I had in mind. This one would be another that we would share, but I needed to ask her first. Even though the bands would be small, they would bond us together for the rest of our lives. Metal rings could easily be taken off or cast away, but ink was an entirely different matter. "You won't drift away," I whispered. "I've got you." At last, this is where my story finally comes to a close, V. I know it's not the awe-inspiring journey you were expecting to read, but hopefully you can forgive me for that. Like I said earlier, I have so much more to live for now, and my tale has barely even begun. I promise I'll do better next time and make sure to give you the starring role you deserve. Which brings me to the only good conclusion I can think of. It's befitting to end things here, since this was the night I learned something important about myself. I'm strong, V. So fucking strong. But that's not what I'm referring to. Not exactly, at least. My abuela knew it when I was little and said I used to swim better than everyone else because I kept my head above the water. Looking back upon it, I think that's why I got those 4 words inscribed on my skin. I refuse to sink. I've found some meaning in them now, but it might shock you to learn that while those words have defined so much of my life, this is also the only tattoo of mine I truly regret getting. Those words feel incomplete. Or maybe the better way of putting it is that they don't feel like me. It's who I was, not who I am now. I'm not ashamed to say I nearly drowned, and I never want to think about what would have happened to me if you hadn't been the strong, amazing, loving woman that you are. I know I'm strong, and maybe I could have survived on my own without you, but I only would have been treading water then, still refusing to sink, and that's not me anymore. Like I said, I've learned something about myself. And once I make things official with you, I'm going to have the words inscribed upon me that I always should have had. I learned to swim.